Hello everyone! In this episode we're making handmade scallion oil noodles with braised beef brisket, or 牛腩手工葱油拌面. We'll start with some nice fatty beef brisket. I'm going to trim off some of that fat over there, since this fat will not render out when we braise the beef later. However, we do want some fat on the brisket so that it stays moist while braising. There'll be some fat you see running through the middle of the brisket, and that's fine to leave on. We'll cut the brisket into cubes. We don't want to cut these cubes too small since they will shrink as we cook them. I'm making noodles for 4 people, so I'll prepare about 600 grams of beef brisket. I've got 1 kilogram here in total. I'll save the rest for something else. Set the beef brisket cubes aside, and we're going to prepare some beef tendon as well. Now, beef tendons are very tough to cut through. I'm just going to show you some footage of me trying to cut through them. Make sure your hands are far away from the knife blade as you try to cut through them. As you can see, it takes quite a bit of effort. If you're struggling with this, you can ask the butcher to help you instead. Overall, I have about 250 grams of beef tendon here, which I think is just right for 4 people. We'll then cut up the beef tendon into manageable sized pieces. We'll be using a pressure cooker to cook these beef tendons since they would otherwise take a very long time to cook. Finally, for that remaining beef fat, we'll just cut it into small cubes and save that for later. We'll add these to the scallion oil to enhance the fragrance. Prepare a wok with some water in it. We'll add some scallions and ginger peels. 1 tablespoon of cooking wine. And we're going to use this water to blanch our beef brisket and tendon, just to get rid of the myoglobin that's stuck in there. And also because beef brisket and tendons tend to have a heavy smell, so this step will get rid of that smell for us. So start in cold water and let it boil gently. Once the water is boiling, you will see some foam floating to the surface, so simply skim that out. We'll do this for about 10 minutes. We'll turn off the heat and prepare a bowl with some cold water. We're going to pick out our parboiled brisket and tendon pieces. Prepare another bowl with a strainer. We're not going to waste that boiling water. Since we skimmed the foam carefully, we can reuse this braising soup. We'll reuse this later when we braise the beef brisket. We'll prepare a pressure cooker with a little bit of water in it. We'll be using this to cook our beef tendons. When the water's boiling, add your beef tendons and cover the pressure cooker. We'll leave it to pressure cook for about 45 minutes. Clean out the wok, heat it up, add 60 milliliters of light soy sauce and 40 milliliters of sweet wheat paste or 甜面酱. If you don't have this, you can use rock sugar instead. We'll then add in the original broth we used to parboil the beef brisket and tendons from earlier, and we'll mix that all up. We'll then add in our beef brisket pieces. Here are the spices we'll need for the braising. We'll need 2 bay leaves, 1 cinnamon stick, 2 pieces of star anise, 2 pieces of dried orange peel, a pinch of fennel seeds, and about 6 cloves. We'll reduce the heat to low and then add in all of the spices after we've given them a quick rinse. After which, we'll cover the wok and let this braise for about 1 hour. I'll add a little bit more water just so there's enough to cover the beef. While we're braising the brisket, let's prepare the noodles. Here I've got 400 grams of bread flour. All-purpose flour will work as well. I've separated them into 2 bowls because I don't know how much I'll need. That's 10 grams of salt, which I'll put into the main bowl. I've got 3 eggs here, but I will need 1 more later. These are big eggs, and the ratio is approximately 100 grams of flour to 1 big egg. But if you're using smaller eggs, you might need a little bit less flour. Pouring the beaten egg mixture into the center of the flour. And we'll mix in that flour into the egg. I am making 4 portions of noodles here, so I've added 1 more egg. I'll add in the rest of the bread flour, and I'll incorporate that remaining egg until I get a nice ball of dough. We'll just work that dough down, and then we'll cut it into 4 pieces. For each piece, we're just going to work it down. We're going to flatten it with our hands first, and then use a rolling pin. Now, if you find that the dough is sticking to the board or the rolling pin, you can add a little bit of cornstarch to prevent the sticking, which I am going to do right here. We'll then keep rolling out the dough, cutting and forming it until we get a rectangle that's about 2 millimeters thick. We'll then fold the rectangle over itself and start cutting the noodles. I have to cut them 1 by 1 with a knife, but if you've got a pasta roller, of course, use that. It's probably a lot faster. Well, that's all my noodles. That's 1 portion of noodles. We'll add some more cornstarch just to keep the noodles separated. Note that it is best to cook these noodles on the same day that you make them. It was about 45 minutes at this point. I tasted my beef brisket. I decided that it wasn't as tender as I wanted it to be, so I added a little bit more water and allowed it to braise for a little while longer. On the other hand, after 45 minutes and releasing the pressure, the tendons were cooked perfectly. Once my beef brisket and tendons were done, I cleaned out my wok again, and I added some of the broth from those tendons. This broth gives your braising liquid a nice sticky consistency when you reduce it down, so we won't need to thicken it later. As you can see, my beef brisket has turned nice and dark brown because I allowed the sauce to reduce until the soy sauce and sweet wheat paste just caramelized a little bit, so that I get a nice deep brown color without needing to use dark soy sauce. We'll then braise the beef brisket and tendons together for another 30 minutes for the beef brisket to get more tender and for the beef tendons to absorb the flavor of the braising liquid from the brisket. We'll get a small saucepan and we'll transfer everything over there. As you can see, it's coming along nicely. the sauce is nice and syrupy without me needing to add any cornstarch. Alright, now it's time to prepare scallion oil. Here I've got 200 grams of onions, 300 grams of big scallions, and 50 grams of ginger. Let's start by slicing up those onions. We'll transfer those to a bowl and start working on the scallions. I cut open the scallion like this so that I can cut the outer part of the scallion into julienne, and then cut the inner part separately. Once I have my scallion juliennes, I will do the same thing with the ginger slices. We'll now prepare a clean wok, to which we'll add our chopped beef fat from earlier and let it render a little bit. Of course, you can leave this part out if you prefer. We'll turn on the exhaust hood and add 100 grams of a neutral oil. I'm using sunflower oil, but you can use corn oil or peanut oil as well. We'll add in our scallion strips and just cook them out for a minute or so. We'll need another 100 milliliters of oil at this stage. So all in all, I've got 200 milliliters of oil. Let the scallion strips fry for another minute or so before we add our onions. The scallions will provide a nice fragrance, while the onions provide a stronger onion flavor. If you want a more subtle onion flavor, you can use shallots instead. Once we fried the onions for about 10 minutes, we'll add in our ginger and fry for another 2 minutes. Ginger cannot be fried for too long, otherwise it loses its aroma. When you start to see the onions and ginger turn nice and brown, we're going to drain them with a slotted spoon so that we can drain out our scallion oil later. Here's a little bonus. You can actually top your noodles with these crispy fried onions and ginger when we're done. So get a nice bowl here, and we'll pour out that oil. We'll add our scallions back in and turn the heat up and just cook them out again for another minute, just to get any excess oil out of them and to make them extra crispy. Trust me, these things taste like French fries when they come out of the wok. And we'll transfer them back into a bowl. And we'll set this aside for when we form our bowl of noodles. Finally, let's prepare one bowl of noodles. We'll start with some green leafy vegetables. This is bok choy, but you can use whatever you want. We'll then add in our noodles. Note that the noodles will expand quite a lot when you boil them, since these are fresh noodles, and they'll absorb a lot of water. Let the water come back to a boil, and then cook them for about 90 seconds. Once they're cooked, we'll take out the bok choy and put them at the bottom of the bowl, and then we'll put our noodles on top of those. You can repeat this process for all 4 servings of noodles, but make sure to use fresh water each time. I like to add a nice soft-boiled egg on the top, so we'll do that. We'll bring the water back to a boil, and just when the water is boiling, we'll turn the heat off, and we'll add in a small egg that's at room temperature. You'll need to tilt the pot here just to make sure it's fully covered, and we'll let that sit for 4.5 minutes. Finally, it's time to assemble our bowl of noodles. We'll start by adding some of those crispy fried scallions. a drizzle of that fragrant scallion oil. Which will mix into the noodles. Once it's nicely mixed, we'll add in some pieces of beef brisket. Look at the color of it. We'll also add in a couple pieces of beef tendon. Now, due to the rich flavor of the brisket and tendon, I did not season my noodles too much, but feel free to add some gravy if you want that additional flavor. Finally, we'll crack in our soft-boiled egg. Unfortunately, I broke the yolk when cracking the egg, but it's fine. It still looks lovely, and there you have it. That is my bowl of handmade scallion oil noodles with braised beef brisket. I hope you enjoyed this recipe.